Before we begin, if you want the full continuation of these stories, more uncensored, 18+ ancient BL content, extended scenes, and unlimited royal forbidden romance, you can join us on Patreon at SpicyAncientBL. YouTube does not allow us to show or monetize everything freely here, so the deeper and more intense versions are waiting for you there. You can find the link in the description and pinned comment. He first noticed him because of the way he knelt. Not in submission, not in the trembling, breathless fear that usually accompanied the presence of the royal family, but with a kind of quiet, meticulous care that simply did not belong in a place as cold and cruel as the imperial palace. The inner courtyards of the Yan Empire were built to crush the human spirit. They were vast, intimidating, and carved from pale, unyielding stone. White jade staircases that reflected the moonlight like ice, towering crimson pillars that seemed to hold up the sky itself, and a suffocating silence that carried the heavy weight of absolute power. In this palace, a single misstep meant death. A single wrong word meant your blood would wash the stones. No one belonged on their knees in a place like this unless they were begging for their life. And yet, there he was. A young man, his coarse, gray servant's robes soaked through at the knees from the morning frost. His sleeves were rolled up, exposing thin, pale wrists. In his hand, he held a small, rough cloth, and he was leaning forward with absolute, unbroken focus as he scrubbed a streak of dried mud from the base of the emperor's ancestral statues. He wasn't rushing. He wasn't scrubbing frantically in terror of being caught by the dawn patrol. He was treating the cold, unfeeling stone as if it were something that deserved patience, as if the work itself was a meditation. High above, standing behind the intricately carved wooden lattice of the Crown Prince's balcony, stood Tianze. Crown Prince Tianze of the great Yan Empire was a man made of winter, feared by the court, terrifying on the battlefield, and utterly untouchable. He had paused on his balcony on his way to the morning assembly, intending only to watch the sunrise and gather his thoughts before dealing with the vipers in the throne room. Instead, his thoughts gathered entirely around the boy on the frozen stones below. Palace guards marched past in their heavy armor. Eunuchs hurried by with their heads bowed. High-ranking court officials in their purple silk robes stepped around the kneeling boy without so much as a glance downward. They moved around him like he was nothing, like he was just another broken piece of the palace architecture. But Tianze could not stop looking. From that high vantage point, he watched the way the wind caught the boy's dark, untied hair, blowing it across his eyes. The boy would pause, blow the stray strands away with a soft exhale, and continue his work. His movements were slow, careful, and possessed a devastating grace that looked entirely misplaced inside a kingdom built on war and bloodshed. Tianze did not know why he stayed there, hidden in the shadows of the balcony, watching a lowly servant scrub the steps. He only knew that turning his back and walking away felt strangely impossible. Later that morning, during a tense military briefing with the Ministry of Rights, Tianze did something he had never done in his entire life. He interrupted the Minister of Defense mid-sentence. "The servant in the ancestral courtyard," Tianze's voice cut through the room like a silver blade. "Who is he?" The minister blinked, the blood draining from his face in confusion. Your Highness? Which servant?" "The one with dark hair, young, thin, working on the lower jade steps this morning." It took less than an hour for the head eunuch to place a bamboo scroll on the heavy mahogany desk in front of Tianze. His name was Jian, age 22. He was not a peasant, nor a common criminal. He was a political hostage. The last surviving prince of the conquered state of Wei, a kingdom Yan had burned to the ground 5 years ago. Stripped of his royal titles, stripped of his family, Jian had been thrown into the lowest ranks of the palace's labor force, left to rot in the outer quarters with no protection, no allies, and no hope. Perfect behavior, never spoke out of turn, never complained, never recognized. Tianze slowly rolled the bamboo scroll closed. The wood groaned under the sudden, unconscious grip of his hands. Jian. The name settled into his chest, heavy and quiet. But across the sprawling expanse of the imperial palace, someone else had noticed Jian too, and for entirely different reasons. Lord Rong was the nephew of the empress. He was a man who possessed a dangerous kind of charm, the loud, arrogant charm of someone who had never been told no in his life. He wore robes of gold and emerald silk, walked with a confident, lazy stride, and believed that the world, and everyone in it, naturally arranged itself for his entertainment. He was a man who believed he deserved everything beautiful that caught his eye. The first time Jian was sent to Lord Rong's pavilion to deliver fresh plum blossoms, Rong looked up from his cup of warm wine and froze. Because Jian was beautiful. Not in a loud, painted way that the concubines and court performers were, not in a way that aggressively demanded attention, but softly, quietly, a haunting, fragile beauty that made a man want to look twice, then look closer, and then never look away. His eyes carried the sorrow of a fallen kingdom, deep and dark, framed by thick lashes that fluttered nervously under Rong's heavy gaze. Rong set his wine cup down and asked for his name. Jian nearly dropped the porcelain vase. His breath hitched. In 5 years, no one of noble blood had asked for his name. They only called him dog, or servant, or traitor. From that moment on, Lord Rong made it a game. He began requesting Jian specifically for deliveries. He would time his afternoon tea in the gardens to match Jian's sweeping schedule. He would offer Jian a piece of sweet lotus pastry from his own silver plate. He would ask him simple questions, leaning in close, letting his expensive sandalwood scent wash over the poor servant. He would compliment Jian's pale hands, tracing a finger over Jian's knuckles when he took a tea tray from him. And Jian, who had grown up in the cold, who had been starved of warmth, of touch, of simply being seen as a human being, mistook this dangerous attention for kindness. And Rong mistook Jian's innocent gratitude for submission. They started meeting in secret, hidden behind the bamboo groves by the koi ponds. Whispered conversations under the moonlight. Rong would bring him discarded, slightly torn silk ribbons, and Jian would treasure them like they were spun gold. Jian's battered, lonely heart opened up in places it had forgotten how to feel. He began to smile, a small, shy thing that only Rong got to see. Rong loved the way Jian looked at him. He loved being admired by the fallen prince. But Rong never brought Jian into the light. He never let Jian stand beside him when the other nobles were around. He never acknowledged him in the grand corridors. If they passed each other in the daytime, Rong would look right through him, leaving Jian to kneel in the dirt with his head bowed. Jian did not question it, because when you have been discarded by the world, when you have never been chosen before, you do not question being chosen in the dark. Weeks bled into months, and from the high balconies, from the shadowed corridors, Crown Prince Tianze watched. He noticed the way Jian had started humming softly while polishing the brass lanterns. He noticed the way Jian sometimes smiled down at a cheap silk ribbon tied around his wrist. He noticed the way Jian moved through the palace as if he were trying to make himself smaller, trying not to disturb the air, waiting desperately for the moon to rise so he could be summoned by a man who did not deserve him. Tianze did not understand why these details burned him. He did not understand why the sight of Jian smiling at the ground made a dark, territorial beast claw at the inside of his ribs. He only knew that the thought of Rong touching Jian made him want to reach for his sword. Then, the mid-autumn imperial banquet arrived. And if you are enjoying this forbidden royal tension, remember, the extended and uncensored 18+ continuation is available on Patreon at SpicyAncientBL. The link is in the description and pinned comment. The banquet was held in the grand pavilion of 1,000 lights. It was a night of overwhelming extravagance. Lanterns floated on the dark water of the lake, music echoed into the starry sky, and the scent of roasted meats and heavy wine filled the air. Lord Rong was seated among his wealthy, arrogant peers. They were laughing loudly, drinking deeply, their voices carrying the absolute assurance of men who own the world. Jian had been assigned to serve wine at the lower tables, but he had spent the last 3 nights awake, carving a small, delicate wooden hairpin from a fallen peach tree branch. He had sanded it until his fingers bled, polishing it until it was smooth. He thought, in his naive, hopeful heart, that he could give it to Rong as a token of his affection under the cover of the fireworks. When a moment of chaos distracted the guards, Jian slipped quietly toward Rong's table. He knelt behind him, his hands trembling as he reached into his coarse robe, holding the small wooden box. But before he could speak, one of Rong's friends, a cruel-eyed general, spotted him. The general pointed a cup of wine at Jian and sneered. "Look at this stray dog. A rat from the Wei Kingdom, scurrying around our tables. Tell me, Rong, is this the little pet you've been keeping in the bamboo groves? The one you boasted about?" The music seemed to stop. The laughter at the table died down. Every eye turned to Jian, who was frozen on his knees, clutching the small wooden box to his chest. Jian looked up at Rong, his dark eyes wide, pleading. "Please," the look said, "please tell them I mean something to you." Rong swirled the wine in his cup, looking down at Jian. He saw the coarse clothes. He saw the dirt on Jian's sandals. He felt the eyes of his powerful friends burning into him. Rong laughed, a sharp, careless sound. "Don't be ridiculous," Rong said, his voice loud enough for the entire pavilion to hear. "He's just a toy. A little distraction I've been entertaining myself with when the court gets dull. Relax, it's not like he's actually worth anything." Jian felt his soul shatter. It wasn't a loud break, it was completely silent. Like a piece of delicate porcelain sinking to the bottom of a frozen lake. The warmth drained from his face. The shy, hopeful light in his eyes died instantly, replaced by the hollow, crushing reality of his existence. He didn't cry, he didn't speak, he just slowly placed the little carved wooden box on the edge of the table, bowed his head until his forehead touched the floor, and backed away into the shadows. Rong did not follow him, because to Rong, nothing of actual value had been lost. The next morning, the sky was heavy with gray clouds. The palace was quiet, recovering from the night of indulgence. Jian still came to work, but Tianze, watching from the library window, noticed the change immediately. The soft humming was gone, the gentle, careful movements were gone. Jian moved like a ghost, like a man carrying an invisible, suffocating weight. His shoulders were curled completely inward, his eyes hollow and fixed permanently on the stones beneath his feet. For the first time in his 25 years of life, Crown Prince Tianze felt a rage so blinding, so pure, that it frightened his own shadow guards. That afternoon, Tianze descended from the upper pavilions. He dismissed his royal entourage with a single, sharp flick of his wrist. He walked alone into the outer courtyards, his black boots echoing against the stone. Jian was kneeling by the pond, scrubbing the moss from the stone lions. The water was freezing, his hands were red and raw. When the tall shadow fell over him, Jian flinched violently. He dropped his brush and instantly pressed his forehead to the ground, his body trembling in pure terror as he recognized the golden dragon embroidered on the hem of the black silk robes. "Your Imperial Highness," Jian whispered, his voice hoarse and broken. Tianze stood over him. He looked at the boy's shaking shoulders, at the raw, bleeding knuckles. "Why are you still working here?" Tianze's voice was deep, commanding, yet holding a strange, dangerous restraint. Jian squeezed his eyes shut. I am a servant of the Empire, Your Highness. I must earn my keep." Tianze stared down at him. The silence stretched between them, heavy and charged with something Jian could not understand. Slowly, Tianze knelt. The crown prince of the Yan Empire, a man who bowed to no one but the emperor himself, knelt in the dirt in front of a slave. Jian gasped, trying to scramble backward, but Tianze's large, warm hand shot out and gripped Jian's wrist. The touch sent a shockwave through Jian's body. It was firm, grounding, and shockingly gentle. "You do not belong on your knees," Tianze said softly, his dark eyes locking onto Jian's terrified gaze. "Not for them, not for anyone." Jian's breath hitched. He didn't understand. But Tianze did. By the time the sun set that day, the palace was thrown into chaos. A royal decree had been issued directly from the Eastern Palace. Jian was no longer a laborer of the outer courts. He was immediately transferred to the Crown Prince's personal pavilion. The following days were a blur of shock and confusion for Jian. He was given a private chamber near the prince's study. He was given robes of soft, midnight blue silk that felt like water against his scarred skin. He was given warm food, hot baths, and absolute silence. His new duties? To grind the prince's ink, to organize his scrolls, to simply exist in the room while Tianze worked. Tasks that required him to stand, to sit, to think, never to kneel. Lord Rong noticed the change immediately. An ugly, twisting irritation bloomed inside Rong's chest, which quickly rotted into panic. He saw Jian walking across the bridges, no longer dressed in rags, but draped in expensive silk, his hair pinned up with silver. He saw the way the palace guards now bowed respectfully to Jian. But worst of all, Rong saw the way Crown Prince Tianze looked at Jian. It was a look of dangerous, absolute possession, a look of silent, simmering devotion, and Rong recognized that look entirely too late. One evening, deep into the winter, the palace was hit by a massive snowstorm. The wind howled against the paper windows of the eastern pavilion. Inside, the room was warm, lit by dozens of flickering candles and the glow of the charcoal braziers. Jian was sitting by the low table, carefully sorting through military reports. Tianze was seated on the opposite side, reading a scroll. But Tianze hadn't turned a page in over an hour. His eyes were entirely focused on Jian. On the soft curve of Jian's neck, on the way the candlelight danced across his dark eyelashes, on the slight parting of his pink lips as he read. "Do you fear the storms, Jian?" Tianze's deep voice suddenly broke the silence, wrapping around the room like a warm blanket. Jian looked up, startled by the sudden break in quiet. He met Tianze's gaze, and for a moment, his heart fluttered in his chest. "No, Your Highness, I find them peaceful." "Why?" Tianze asked, shifting slightly, leaning closer over the table. Jian looked down at his hands. Because when the snow falls so heavily, the rest of the world disappears. The cruelty of the palace, the noise, the expectations, it all gets buried. Everything slows down. It feels safe. Tianzi's chest tightened. He realized then that Jian had always been soft, gentle, and fragile in a world that had never, not even for a second, slowed down to protect him. "You are safe here," Tianze said. His voice was no longer a royal command, it was a vow. Jian's breath caught. He looked up, his dark eyes wide and shining with unshed tears. He had spent his whole life waiting for someone to drop him, to discard him, to use him. He was waiting for the hidden blade. "Your Highness," Jian whispered, his voice trembling, "I am a prince of a ruined kingdom. I am a ghost. Why are you doing this for me?" Tianze stood up. He walked slowly around the table, the rustle of his heavy robes the only sound in the room. He stopped right beside Jian, towering over him, radiating a suffocating, intoxicating heat. Slowly, Tianze reached down. His large, calloused fingers brushed against Jian's cheek, incredibly light, as if he were touching a sacred relic. Jian shivered, his eyes fluttering shut at the contact. "Because," Tianze murmured, his thumb tracing the line of Jian's jaw, "they were blind, but I am not." The tension in the room was unbearable, thick, sensual, and heavy with unspoken desire. Jian could feel the heat of Tianze's body pulling him in like a magnet. He could smell the sharp, intoxicating scent of pine and incense that belonged only to the prince. When Tianze leaned in, his lips hovering just inches from Jian's ear, Jian felt his entire body melt. "You will never hide in the shadows again," Tianze whispered, his breath ghosting over Jian's sensitive skin. "Do you understand me?" Jian could only nod, his heart pounding so hard he was sure Tianze could hear it. That night, Tianze did not let Jian return to his own chambers. When Jian fell asleep sitting by the fire, exhausted from the warmth, Tianze did not wake him. He simply scooped the delicate prince into his arms, carrying him effortlessly across the pavilion, and laid him down in his own royal bed, pulling the fur blankets over him. As winter melted into spring, the palace began to notice the profound change in Jian. It was not a loud, arrogant transformation. It was like watching a crushed flower slowly turn its face back toward the sun. Jian no longer walked with his shoulders hunched. He did not flinch when doors opened too quickly. His eyes, once permanently fixed on the floor, now lifted to meet the gaze of those who spoke to him. He was regaining his royal bearing. He was beautiful, devastatingly so, and he was untouchable. And Tianze? Tianze had begun structuring his entire life around the fallen prince. He moved his court meetings to the afternoon so he could share morning tea with Jian. He commanded the royal kitchens to prepare southern dishes from Jian's ruined homeland. He bought him books of poetry, rare inks, and carved jade. He told the court it was merely keeping a political hostage comfortable. But the court knew. They saw the way the crown prince's hand would linger on Jian's waist when they walked through the gardens. They saw the way Tianze's terrifying, cold eyes would instantly soften the second Jian entered a room. Lord Rong saw it too, and he was going mad. He had lost his prestige. He was the laughingstock of the inner circle, the man who had held a diamond in his hands and thrown it into the mud, only for the future emperor to pick it up and place it in a crown. One evening, Rong cornered Jian in the lantern-lit corridor outside the Imperial Library. "Jian," Rong stepped out of the shadows, his face twisted in desperation. Jian stopped. He didn't flinch. He didn't bow. He simply looked at the man who had once broken his heart, his dark eyes calm and entirely unbothered. "Lord Rong," Jian said smoothly, his voice devoid of any emotion. Rong stepped closer, trying to use his height to intimidate him, trying to grasp at the old dynamic. "You think you're safe with him? You think he actually cares about you? You're just his new pet. You're replacing me that easily?" Jian looked at Rong. He looked at the expensive clothes, the desperate eyes, the arrogant sneer that now looked so incredibly pathetic. "You are mistaken," Jian said softly, his voice echoing in the quiet corridor. Rong frowned. "Mistaken?" "Yes," Jian tilted his head slightly, his expression perfectly serene. "You were never something to replace. You were merely a lesson." Rong froze, the words striking him like a physical blow. He had no response, because for the first time, he realized that Jian no longer saw him. Not truly. Rong was nothing but a ghost of a bad memory. Jian turned and walked away, his blue silk robes flowing gracefully behind him, leaving Rong completely alone in the dark. The climax of their unspoken romance came during the Emperor's Grand Spring Festival. The entire court was gathered in the throne room. Hundreds of officials, generals, and nobles stood in perfect ranks. The Emperor sat on his golden throne, his gaze sweeping over his empire. It was a terrifying, suffocating display of absolute power. Jian stood off to the side, hidden behind the ranks of the scribes, keeping his head down. This was a place where he did not belong. He was the prince of a dead nation, a hostage. He felt the familiar weight of his unworthiness creeping back into his bones. Suddenly the emperor spoke, his voice booming across the hall. "Crown Prince Tianze, the time has come for you to choose a consort. The daughters of the noble houses are waiting. Whom do you favor?" The entire hall held its breath. Lord Rong smirked from the sidelines. This was it. This was where the fantasy ended. This was where Tianze would choose a powerful woman, and Jian would be thrown back into the shadows where he belonged. Jian closed his eyes, preparing his heart to be broken one final time. He took a quiet step backward, intending to slip out the side doors before the tears could fall. "I have already made my choice, Imperial Father." Tianze's voice rang out, cold, powerful, and utterly absolute. Jian froze. Before the entire court, before the emperor, before the hundreds of gaping nobles, Crown Prince Tianze turned his back on the throne. He walked down the center aisle, his heavy black robes trailing over the gold-leafed floor. The crowd parted for him like the sea. He walked straight toward the scribes, straight toward the shadows. He stopped right in front of Jian. The hall was so silent you could hear a pin drop. Jian's breath was trapped in his throat. He looked up, his dark eyes meeting Tianze's fierce, burning gaze. Tianze didn't say a word. He didn't need to. He reached out, in front of the entire Yan Empire, and took Jian's trembling, pale hand in his own. His grip was strong, protective, and undeniable. Jian gasped softly, staring at their joined hands. Tianze pulled him forward, out of the shadows, and led him into the center of the blinding light of the throne room. He stood shoulder to shoulder with the fallen prince, their fingers intertwined tightly for every single person to see. Because Tianze never believed in titles. He never believed in conquered bloodlines or the cruel hierarchies of the palace. He believed in worth. And Jian, the boy who had been beaten, starved, and forced to scrub the frozen stones on his knees, had become the one person Crown Prince Tianze would burn the entire world down to protect. He would never, for the rest of his life, allow Jian to be beneath anyone ever again. As they stood there, hand in hand, facing the stunned silence of the emperor and the court, Jian felt a tear slip down his cheek, not a tear of sorrow, but the overwhelming, beautiful tear of a man who had finally, truly come home. If you want the next part, the uncensored continuation, and more unlimited 18+ Ancient Royal BL stories, come join Spicy Ancient BL on Patreon. The link is waiting for you in the description and pinned comment.